Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. Thanks for connecting to this event. Thanks for coming to UNIDROIT in Villa Alto Brandini. Thanks to you, those of you who've come from very far, some of you. And thanks to those who are not here in person, but who have connected. Right. So for those of you who are not here, not just because you're part of the joint venture and the group for the principles on reinsurance contract law, but rather have come to this event and might know a little bit less of why UNIDROIT is involved in this. I'll say very few quick words. First of all, for those of you who are less acquainted with UNIDROIT, UNIDROIT is almost 100 years old. It's an intergovernmental organization whose aim is to harmonize private law. And out of the 3 global intergovernmental organizations that do harmonization of private law, are sister organizations, UNCITRAL and of the UN and the Hague Conference on PIL. UNIDROIT is perhaps the most academic one. So it is, this is in good part an academic event, and therefore we feel particularly at ease with an event which has a strong academic component. Many of you might not know that UNIDROIT was founded in the context of the League of Nations in 1926, and it was founded mostly as an academic venture. And here we had the privilege of having the brightest legal minds of the time, Ernst Rabel, and everyone who had actually the ideas of coming up with new instruments and new state-of-the-art path-breaking type of approach to law back then, in a time when economic growth was linked to peace, and in a time when peace was more needed than ever. Another reason why we're particularly keen on this event and hosting all of you is the fact that we produce private law instruments and we use public money. So we do not, what we would hate is to squander public resources. For us, it's very important that we do work which is good at an academic and abstract level, but at the same time is extremely useful in practice. And this project and this endeavor has a very strong practical component. And many of you are here because you're top practitioners. And even the academics involved in the project have a very strong practical side. Therefore, the fact that this is, on the one hand, theoretically superb, but at the same time extremely useful in practice, makes us also very proud and very comfortable with our partnership. A third element which is important for us is the fact that what we do here is we lend our dear UNIDROIT principles for international commercial contracts to a specific sector for the experts in the area to adapt the principles to the extent that it's possible. As I'm sure you all are aware, the UNIDROIT principles are the restatement of contract law which is global. We have seen many attempts, very good attempts at harmonization and recent restatements, but they were either regional, as we've seen in the US or in Europe, or they were limited to some contracts, for example, the CISG of the United Nations. This, however, our instrument is aimed at any type of private contract, which is something which is very useful, but at the same time, it renders it very general. And therefore, the fact that a group of experts such as yourselves undertake to apply this general framework to a specific sector of the law is particularly useful for us, and is most likely the future path that we will follow to develop our contract law work. So this is the first example and a very welcome one, but perhaps others will follow. So enough for my general remarks. I now, of course, like to thank specifically Professors Helmut Heiss and Professor Bandt for leading this project, and to all the members of the project. A special thank is also in order for Professor Diana Cellini, who's going to speak today, later, right now, actually, Christian Lang from the Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, Larry Kuitunen from Eve P&C Insurance, and Rosaria Teresa Canfora from Generali Italia. Thank you very much, and we are very much looking forward to today and to the 2 days that will follow. Anna?
Thank you. This is what happens in beautiful but old rooms. I'm very sorry about that. So thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. And I would like to really join Ignacio in expressing our delight to act as hosts of this dissemination panel on the principles of reinsurance contract law, which is actually one event in the series of ATILA lectures of the European Law Institute, the ATILA Transatlantic Lectures on Insurance Law, of which we know there were quite a lot of other lectures organized in the past, and some of them also already dedicated to the PRICL. And I also would like to join in thanking the project leaders and the co-organizers, Professor Helmut Heiss and Professor Wandt, particularly, but also, if I may, the PRICL team, Marta Ostrovska and Romy Etler, who organized this so well. Without them, we wouldn't be here. And also, of course, the organizers of the ATILA lectures and the European Law Institute for hosting this lecture in their series. And of course, all the distinguished speakers who are good friends as well, and to all the participants. Now, Ignacio already explained why UNIDROIT is involved and why UNIDROIT is very keen on hosting this seminar, and not just because of the incredible practical interest of talking about this kind of contracts, international contracts, insurance contracts, but also because we have proudly participated in this project from the start. When it was included in the UNIDROIT work program back in 2016. So it's actually a veritable UNIDROIT project. And at the time we were approached by the team leaders who had set up this international team of distinguished academic experts, but also 2 advisory groups composed of representatives of global insurance and reinsurance markets. And I think this is really why this project is so important, because it has this theoretical but very practical element, as was already said. And UNIDROIT was invited to participate, as Ignacio said, in view of the fact that the UNIDROIT principles could provide an ideal starting point for your work, and because they offer this internationally accepted, commercially reasonable, flexible set of global rules for general contract law, and of course also with all the necessary adaptations, as we will hear. And so I think one of the main inspirations was the idea of this soft law approach to the harmonization of the law. And the second was, if I understand well, the possibility of given to parties to choosing both the PRICL and the PRICL if they so wish, or either as a governing law or content of their contract. But I think more generally to look at the UNIDROIT principles and be inspired by them with all the necessary adaptations, which are linked to the way these contracts were drafted in the past, but also they work in practice. So I think Helmut will explain about all the paths and steps that were already taken, and the fact that a part of this project has already been published in 2019. And we are very happy to host in the following 2 days and co-host actually, but have here at UNIDROIT for the first time the meeting of the working group, the 11th session of the working group. And I would only like to, conclude by mentioning only one of the many things that we did together, the imminent publication of a note that seeked to offer some guidance at the general level as to how the PRICL can be applied to contractual disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemics and related measures. That was based on the example of a similar note that had been released by the Secretariat. It was released in 2020 on the UNIDROIT principles to look at how they could self-solve the main contractual disruptions coming from this situation. I understand this will not be the topic of discussion today, because this is a more general discussion in practice of how the PRICL can be useful for the market and the people involved in the market. And we are all convinced that this is the case, but I'm not the right person to argue on this, because we have a wonderful panel who will start talking now. And so I will just give the floor back to Ignazio and stop talking. And again, welcome. We are incredibly happy to see so many of you here in person and so many connecting online. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. This is, the Principles of Reinsurance Contract Law is a wonderful project. I'm not sure the acronym sounds very nice in English, but that's okay. Professor Vanth.
Yeah, only a few words of welcome on behalf of the PRICL group. I'm very delighted to see so many of you joining us today, and our great thanks go to UNIDROIT for hosting us and for being partner in this project throughout the project. So it's very great to have such a vivid cooperation with you. I'm not a member of the panel today, so allow me a few words up front. I don't have to tell you how important reinsurance is. You know that better than I as a law professor, even if with some experience in business matters. But you could also say we got along for centuries without such a PRICL group. You are right, but it could be better. Then we know the times have changed, and we know Solvency II striving to control all risks, and therefore reinsurance can't be left out. And therefore, I'm really convinced that it was necessary to set up the PRICL group. All important key messages concerning the group will be given to you by the panelists. I only welcome you. Thanks for being here and joining us remotely or in presence. Thank you very much.
I think we just go and the speakers can come on to the podium.
Well, thank you very much, and may I ask the other speakers to come to the podium.
You want to come in the middle?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, sure. So Ignacio and Anna, thank you very much for hosting us again, if you allow me to say, because we did have the opportunity some time ago to present the idea of the PRICL project in public to UNIDROIT members. This time it's different. We presented from UNIDROIT to mainly market participants. And I think it is very important for market participants also to see once the sacred halls of unification of private law, which the way I call UNIDROIT usually when I talk to people who are not so much involved with UNIDROIT. You, Manfred, said it was very important to have this idea. That may be true, but it was also very easy to have the idea. And if I need any evidence that it's an obvious obviously a good idea to standardize principles of reinsurance contract law, then history gives me the evidence. Because in 1935, 1936, it was exactly 9-10 years after UNIDROIT was founded, there was an initiative in this institute to standardize reinsurance contract law. And the only reason why it wasn't pursued were the circumstances of these days. It was not that these days didn't need it, or that thereafter it was not needed. The political situation in those days didn't allow for it. So what we have done truly is taking up an old idea and reinvented it. And I'm glad that the circumstances of our days, as bad as they may be at times right now, still allow for such projects and things that make you look ahead and up front and not back. Anyhow, we will start with our deliveries of contents now. I've said that we have delivered speeches and papers and publications on the fundamentals and the theory of our project before. This is there, it's published, it will be available for everybody to read. Today we will have a more practical oriented presentation of the PRICL, especially by involving our practitioners and presenting their views. But Professor Cerini and myself will give some introduction, and my own will deal with how the PRICL could be used by the reinsurance markets. Because often when people look at our principles, our book that we published online in 2019, and then that will be published as a final version of the PRICL expected to be 2024, at the end of 2024. They say, well, that's nice, but is it possible to use it as applying to our contracts? And so I would like to say a few words on modes of application in reinsurance markets. I will not be theoretical, I will be very much down to earth and say that the use of it is very easy, and it has a substantial impact on reinsurance contracts in which the PRICL would be used. I want to start this presentation with just simply comparing the PRICL with the situation under national law, because up until the PRICL were invented, so to speak, the only option that you had was choosing a national law as the law governing the reinsurance contract. And if you chose national law governing a reinsurance contract, what then did you get in the past? Well, the national law contained specific rules on reinsurance contract law. More or less, rather less, I would say. Most jurisdictions do not offer reinsurance specific rules of contract law. So unless you choose some experienced law in reinsurance like English law or New York law, you get nothing reinsurance specific. And if you choose the law governing as any national law, let's say Swiss law, what you get is one particular law for one contract and probably some other law for another contract, and yet a third law for a third contract. And all your portfolio of contracts will be submitted to various different laws that you may know better or worse, or better, more or less. If you would switch to the principles of reinsurance contract law, you would have, first of all, specific rules on reinsurance contracts that are set out presented like a statute, even though they are private work and not binding at all. They come along with comments explaining mainly the purpose of the rule and its functioning, which is very important for the interpretation of the rule. And they come along with illustrations, which is basically a fictitious case law that we implanted together with the comments in the publication on the PRICL. And on top, what you get automatically when you apply the PRICL is a set of uniform rules of general contract law. They have been mentioned before. They are the UNIDROIT principles on international commercial contracts. It's a transnational commercial contract law, what better could suit a transnational contract like a reinsurance contract than transnational commercial contract law principles? So it's a perfect set. And this is why we offer this combination to the practice. And then practitioners usually ask me, but how do I apply the PRICL instead of, as mentioned before, let's say Swiss contract law? And no. I would just like to remind you first place how you did it, how the reinsurance markets are operating right now. They have clauses, they may be a bit longer or shorter, but they all melt down to what is reprinted here. They may say any dispute, and then they use language like concerning the terms of the contract, the clauses of the contract, the limitations of the contract. All this is superfluous. It's not important from a legal point of view. But what is important is agreed by the reinsured and the reinsurers to be subject to the laws of countries as defined in the original policies. That is just an invented example. And I say that the original policies are such under a global insurance program, and there may be Swiss policies involved, Brazilian policies involved, and the Saudi Arabian policy involved. And that means you submit the reinsurance contracts to various different legal systems. Swiss law, this I know somehow, has 0 specific rules on reinsurance contracts. So the federal court is in one decision debating what then you apply. Reinsurance customs, even though Swiss law doesn't openly refer to customs like German or Austrian law does, but in need you take customs, but then where do you find the custom? Well, maybe in the London market, but why the London market? Why not the New York market? That's open to discussion, and there's a substantial insecurity as to which law ultimately a court would apply if it really had to deliver a judgment in substance. Now, in Brazilian law, I would assume it's the same, but I hesitate because we have our expert, Sergio Melo, among us. What I do know for sure in Brazilian law, you have a big textbook on reinsurance contract law, which is written by the expert I've just named and who is among us, but I don't think there's a lot of literature or there's a lot of case law, and certainly there is no codification of reinsurance contract law. And when it comes to Saudi Arabian law, then again, I would assume, subject to what Saudi Arabian colleagues would tell me, that the situation is not very promising as to reinsurance specific rules contained in Saudi Arabian law, or a general contract law that is easily accessible to a, let's say, German reinsurer when negotiating with a Swiss insurer with policies that concern also Saudi Arabia. So what would be the effects, or what are the effects actually of such traditional choice of law? You have little or no reinsurance specific rules. You have different general contract laws applying, regulating so important questions as like the interpretation of the contract. To a certain degree, you apply even different legal cultures, and you never know what the relevant trade customs are, and where you take them from and what really is their content. And nevertheless, this is everyday business. This is how reinsurance is done on an everyday basis. And nobody ever asks the questions, when I choose Brazilian law, what am I choosing there? Can you give me the details up front? No, you just choose Brazilian law due to the negotiations, or Swiss law. And they never ask you, what's Swiss reinsurance law? They just choose it blindly, more or less. And so I wonder whether a choice in favor of the PRICL could offer more certainty and a more specific expectation of what you get when you choose them. And the truth is, as long as you subject a reinsurance contract to arbitration, the UNCITRAL rules on arbitration, which are applied, I'm overstating a bit, around the globe in many, many jurisdictions, will make sure that this simple sentence will suffice to push all national law aside and make the principles of reinsurance contract law the law governing your reinsurance contract. All you need, and we have proposed that in our publication, is the sentence, this contract shall be governed by the principles of reinsurance contract law. And since they will be finalized and be republished in 24, I stated here 24. Now, what do you get? Can you go back? What do you get? You get reinsurance specific rules. You get them with comments and illustrations, a case law, as I've mentioned. Yes, you have a set of uniform general contract law, because once you choose the PRICL, they automatically refer to the principles of international commercial contracts of UNIDROIT as the underlying general contract law. So you have uniform rules on, for instance, contract interpretation. And those principles, both the PRICL as well as the UNIDROIT principles, are a law mix of different legal cultures, mainly the Anglo-American rules, the Roman and the German rules on contract law are mixed. And so they are very good in bridging those legal cultures. And if you want to subject your contract to a state court and you still would want the PRICL to apply, you have another option, which is my last slide. You just leave your choice of law clause, which is the very first sentence. This contract shall be governed by the laws of the countries as defined in the original policies. Remember, that was Swiss, Brazilian, Saudi Arabian law, as I've stated it. But then you add a sentence. It's very simple. The principles of reinsurance contract law are incorporated into this contract to the extent that they are not inconsistent with the other terms of the contract. So you have general contract rules that you incorporate into your contract, and they apply as part of the contract. And of course, when you install specific rules in your contract, those specific rules will take priority over the general principles of reinsurance contract law. Now, when you incorporate the principles into your contract, they are not the governing law. They become nothing else but contract clauses. And contract clauses always give way to mandatory rules of the law applicable. But there is so few mandatory contract law rules in reinsurance contracts, so that in the very end, you reach a very similar result by using this mode of implementation. Broadly speaking, you will be out of national law and you will have a uniform set of reinsurance specific and general contract law rules at hand. So again, to sum up, it's only one sentence that you need to add to your contract, and you will be in the middle of a transnational set of reinsurance and general contract law principles. Now, I'm aware of the fact that you may apply the PRICL in other modes, but this is the way we offer it. And practitioners will tell us that there were other ways in the past to use PRICL and apply them in some specific circumstances. But this is the way we shaped the PRICL and offer it to the market. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Thank you to UNIDROIT for this hospitality here, and thank you to my colleagues of the PRICL group, to our chairman, Manfred Wann, and Professor Helmut Heiss for asking me to start to introduce you to some basic ideas and principles that we find in the PRICL project. So I just wait one moment, maybe you can upload the slides. So I will try to introduce you to some basic ideas that we try to follow when drafting these principles. So the very first basic idea is simplifying and providing a global soft law for reinsurance contracts. So as Helmut has already said,
we are here in front of a project that puts together representatives not only of the European Union, not only of one continent, but in a very global perspective, in line with the spirit and the idea of UNIDROIT. Simplifying for whom? For everybody who needs to use and apply reinsurance contract. So this is a tool for practitioners, first of all, for insurance and reinsurance companies, for arbitrators, for interpreters. So for everybody who need to use and apply reinsurance contracts. And the idea is also to give a little more legal certainty in this field. So to provide a relatively comprehensive and uniform soft law on reinsurance in order to simplify operations for market actors and to give effectiveness to negotiation. And if we read the preamble of the PRICL, it clearly states the PRICL shall apply to contracts of reinsurance where the parties have agreed that their contracts should be governed by them. So it's a choice of law, it's a choice by the parties, but unlike the PICC, the reference is to not only to international contracts, but in principle to every contract. And this is not only because reinsurance is naturally and frequently in an international contract, but because in principle that could also be chosen by purely national parties, even and especially because, as Helmut says, in many jurisdictions, there are no contract rules dedicated to reinsurance. So even national parties should decide to apply these principles to their contract. The second idea is, as I said, to simplify. And so we find general rules in the PRICL project. This chapter 1 is dedicated to general provision. And I think that's quite important because it gives a systematic approach to the project, but it makes it also more intelligible for those who would like to apply. If we read the title of this part, we understand that it's clearly stated it's a substantive scope of application, how to fill in external gaps, the exclusion or modification of the PRICL, the reference to the importance of usages and practices of the market, the idea that we have mandatory rules that cannot be derogated by the parties who choose to apply PRICL, interpretation of internal gaps, and then definition of reinsurance term. So this is extremely important, as I said, because the PRICL proposes specific rules in those areas where reinsurance practitioners, first of all, together with scholars, of course, have identified a higher need to have legal certainty. And as it has been already remembered, in many jurisdictions, in many legal systems, first of all, there is no definition of a reinsurance contract. Secondly, many legal systems do not have specific rules applying to reinsurance contract. And in addition, rules concerning insurance contract are not applied to reinsurance by way of default. So there is a need, of course, to have more regulation by the parties on this side and more legal certainty. And I remember that this legal situation of the legal systems, it's quite impressive if we think that reinsurance contracts are extremely important and they were identified as the silent regulator of the market, because of course, in many situations, what insurance companies can do and can cover is directly connected to what reinsurers can cover at their turn. Let me just go back to this proposal to the case of Italy. The definition of reinsurance contract is absent from our legal system. There is a reference in the Code of Private Insurance approved in 2005, but this definition is mainly devoted to supervisory purposes. So it has nothing to do with the contract among the party. And in addition, from the Italian perspective, there is no set of contractual rules unequivocally applicable between reinsurance parties. We still debate about, for example, disclosure rules that are applied in insurance and their application to reinsurance. So the very few rules that we have in the civil code are just devoted to specific aspects. For example, in order to exclude any direct contractual relation among the reinsurance company and the final insured. So, for example, at this proposal, we find in the PRICL a definition of the contract of reinsurance. You can read it in Article 1.21, a contract under which one party, the reinsurance, in consideration of a premium, promises another party, the reinsured, cover against the risk of exposure to insurance and or reinsurance claim. The second basic idea, how to apply, because as we said, we started from an academic project, but at the same time, there is a large number of practitioners, experts of the field that are involved. So the very important thing is how to apply this principle. Helmut Heis already told us how to make the connection within the contract terms. But another important aspect to take into consideration is that these principles are to be applied together with the PICC. So the idea is that the reinsurance rules are to be read together with the PICC, and this implies, of course, a choice of application of the general rules of contract proposed by the PICC. We find these aspects very clearly stated in Article 1.12 of the PRICL. Issues not settled by the PRICL should be settled in accordance with the UNIDROIT principles of International Commercial Contract 2016. So this is referring to what we called external gaps issues. Let me say that this marks a clear difference with another project that some of us has been involved into that was dedicated to insurance contract law. And this was a very European project, so to say, but that was intended as a standalone project. So it also took a lot of time to come to the drafting of the principle of European insurance contract law. While the support, so to say, the skeleton offered by the PICC to the PRICL is an important and essential element. In addition, the third basic idea that I want to focus on is that we have chosen, together with all the members of the group, to introduce specific rule in PRICL only when it was strictly necessary. So the PRICL proposes specific rules deviating from the PICC in those areas where reinsurance practitioners, first of all, has expressed the higher need to have legal certainty. And so the principle tried to set the framework in order to combine the rules more often used by the market and detailed in usually adopted contract clauses with underlying general principle commonly accepted by the industry. And this is, of course, a tool to achieve efficiency in negotiations. So to simplify once again the work of the party. And this hybrid approach is also mirrored by the language used and explained to the readers in each notes and comments relating to the PRICL aspects. So you find this clearly expressed in this summary where you can see some of the items, so to say, of the toolbox offered to the practitioners with reference to specific rules where PRICL deviate from, so to say, general contract law and in particular to PICC principles. I will only devote my attention to one aspect in particular. We know that, of course, the principle of good faith is crucial in the PICC, and if refers to relation duties and substantial duties. Well, in the PRICL, we decided to introduce a rule of so-called utmost good faith. So we reproduce, first of all, the bilateral duty, and the idea that the duty, as and all duties provided, are intended through all the life of the reinsurance contract, through negotiation, formation, operation, termination, or avoidance of the contracts. The parties owe one another at least the duties set forth in Chapter 2, and they refer both to the insurer and to the reinsurer. But as I said, there is a part deviating from general contract law with a clear reference to the duty of utmost good faith. This is, of course, not only theoretical, because we know that some scholars put some critical notes on the distinction among good faith and utmost good faith, but equally we know that the market consider this difference extremely important. So it's clearly stated that the parties own one another the duty of utmost good faith. We use here the English terminology, of course, but it is a well-known terminology in all jurisdiction, in all legal tradition, as well as in civil law traditions and jurisdiction. But most of all, as I said, is a terminology that is well and completely familiar to the market for many reasons. First of all, because of course the reference to utmost good faith is very similar to what we use in insurance contract law, to what some legal sources of the law provides. As I said, it is in line with market uses, and it is a duty that it is intended to apply both in the pre-contractual phase as well as during the performance of the contract. And once again, this aspect, it's clearly accepted by the market. What it is more difficult in practice is sometimes to identify how to apply or even to define the notion of utmost good faith. And so, for example, that is why quite ambitiously, in a sort of restatement, as the Secretary General referred to in a sort of global restatement, we try to identify the notion of utmost good faith, honesty and transparency, as well as fair taking into account the interest of the other party. This is, of course, a paramount definition. And as I said, it is not a theoretical approach, because as some brilliant scholars describing reinsurance have identified this historical duty of utmost good faith as the necessary element to decrease monitoring cost and ex-ante contracting cost. So it's a very practical rule that we received from the market, and we decide to put clearly stated in the PRICL project. Finally, I will not deal with all the details, but another important aspect that we identified as one where a deviation from the PICC was necessary concerns remedies for breach of contract. As you will see going through the text of the PRICL, the terminology differs a little from the one used in the PICC, where the relevant remedies are identified and the consequences of non-performance. But of course, in very practical words, we make the same reference to non-performance, late performance, and partial non-performance. But once again, the need for deviating from the general contract rule, as identified by the PICC related to specific aspects of the reinsurance contract. In particular, and I just mentioned this because I don't want to take too much time from the discussion that we will have later, we made a specific reference to the so-called violation of the duty of disclosure. As I say, this is one of the essential elements in insurance contract and in reinsurance contracts. And that is why, for example, you find specific solution concerning this duty, and of course for the breach of this duty. So as you see, I think everybody has the chance to look at the whole draft of the project, which is openly available. So this is just two examples, the utmost good faith provision and the topic of remedies, where talking with practitioners and looking to different jurisdictions, we have decided to introduce specific rules. So I think I can close here, and we can add some other details with the discussions of our colleagues.
Thank you very much. And it's now time for our colleagues from reinsurance markets to join us here at the panel. And we will have the wonderful opportunity to throw questions on them as to their position on the PRICL and their application in the reinsurance market. Our colleagues are Rosaria Teresa Acanfora from Generali, Christian Lang from Swiss Re, and Larry Kuitinen from the IF group. So it's a mix of representatives from the direct and from the reinsurance industry. Thank you for being with us and willing to answer our questions. Diana and I, we have sort of collected some questions that we would like to you to answer. And if you allow me, Diana, I would start with a question, a very general question that I would like to put to Larry. We have now discussed what we offer to the industry, to the reinsurance market, and we would like to hear from our practitioners what benefits you would see stemming from the PRICL for the reinsurance and the direct insurance industry, and also maybe a comment on to what extent the PRICL as they are published right now are already being used by the direct and reinsurance industry.
Thank you, Helmut, for the question. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here in front of you all. I feel honored to be part of this panel and for having been member of this group for a number of years already. Much have been said already about the benefits of added contractual certainty. So I will not say anything more on that. However, I will mention something of very practical benefit to especially direct insurance companies. So that's my role, working in a direct insurance operation. And of course, we as insurers are heavily, as reinsurers as well, heavily regulated. Solvency II applies to us, and that regulation obliges us to monitor and mitigate and control various types of risk. One of those risks is operational risk. And working with reinsurance, you very quickly see that reinsurance is of such critical component to most business models of insurance companies globally. And that is because reinsurance is a substitute for capital. And that therefore it is a tool for optimizing the balance sheet of an insurance operation. And if this tool should fail, it of course means that there could be a hit to the balance sheet of the insurance group. And therefore the impact could be very large. Now, in the old world, when we were working with reinsurance, if you were to fail in your duties towards your partners, what would happen? If you failed in your pre-contractual duty of disclosure, you would risk contractual avoidance. So the entire contract null and void from the beginning of it. And this could have huge financial implications. And typically this would only arise in situations where there already is a very large claim at hand, because that is the only time when there is the motive to actually investigate if everything has been done properly. So this is something that we keep thinking about in direct insurance companies, more or less on a day-to-day basis when we work with reinsurance and the placement of reinsurance covers. And the PRICL offers us as practitioners a way to mitigate and control this operational risk, which is a huge risk for insurance groups. It is providing us with a direct tool to do exactly what Solvency II requires us to do, mitigate the risk. So by applying PRICL, you get access to a well-defined set of disclosure rules, but also the remedies, which are more or less the modern version of it. So proportional remedies, if you make a small mistake, you lose little. If you make a large mistake, you lose a lot. And if you act fraudulently, then you lose everything. So it's a very fair set. And we actually already use PRICL in all our core reinsurance contracts. We have done a partial adoption of it. So we incorporate simply the key rules on disclosure and remedies. We started doing this already in 2020. So very beginning when the PRICL was published. And we wanted to test how will it be received by our partners, how will it work? And we have been very pleased by this experience so far.
I would address to Christian because you say that you applied, in fact, but as we try to show, there might be practical references on the application. You can make reference to contract clauses, but in practice, how do you think, Christian, that the new rules and standards can make their way into the practice, and what would help eventually the industry to adopt the PRICL in the reinsurance market?
Okay, yeah, so thank you, Diana. How does such soft law make it into the industry? I think the answer is twofold. First, it needs to be better than the existing. And secondly, people have to believe that it's better than the existing. And that's the two things. Of course, we believe that what we do here in PRICL is really providing more clarity. We believe that with all the thorough work that has gone in by our colleagues from the university and supported from the practitioner side, really has clarified many aspects that were unclear, has come up with a set of rules that can be applied and that follow well-established legal concepts. So this widely dispersed case law that often governs it, which goes into various directions depending on what country you end up in or what arbitration panel you end up in front of, has been put into a structure which we believe really works. The second thing, I mean, you can have the greatest invention. If people don't believe it's the greatest invention, if they don't see it at work, it will not fly. So how do we make the industry first aware and secondly believe that it is something good, that it is easy to apply and that it is better than the unsecurity where we're in? Speaking about unsecurity, insurance and reinsurance companies, they are professionals in risk. I mean, we all know there is a risk in our wordings, but it's a known unknown. We know where the blind spots are. We know where the risks are. We know where the uncertainties are. We can calculate it in. We know the leeway. To remove that with something that we do not know as well, and where we do not know the flaws as well, is a high burden. Because what would you take as a risk manager, again, as a risk professional? You take a risk that you know that you can calculate, or you take a risk that you do not know that well. And this is why first, PRICL needs to be made known. It needs to be explained, and this is why we all sit here and try to explain it. Secondly, we have to convince people. We have to convince the relevant people in the industry that it does work, that it is good. Now, if I go out there and tell, hi, my friends, you know, PRICL is a really good thing. Just trust me, I'm a lawyer. Put it in place. Well, I might not have that many followers that would really create the momentum in the industry. And Rome hasn't been built in a day, and the insurance code of law, it's another code, or the insurance body of law hasn't been built in a day. So PRICL won't become a success in a day. It is a steady process. It requires a lot of stamina. And I've seen some very encouraging signs just recently that was circulated in this group. First arbitration panels start to refer to PRICL. And that is exactly what we need. It needs to be made known. It needs to be referred to. And I think the breakthrough will be once we have a few cases that have been decided based on principles of PRICL and where they have been applied. And in the best case, where the court even, or the arbitration panel even says, this is how it works. It's all clear. It's all written down in PRICL. This will be the breakthrough that we're looking for. So we still got a long way to go, but I see really just in the last year or so, I see very encouraging signs that we're on the right path to make it adopted. As I said, people need to see the benefit out of it and need to see that this risk, and it's an operational risk to have a misunderstanding of the wordings, that they can reduce this risk because PRICL brings more clarity, more predictability, and that's all we need.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was impressive. If I had lectured that you could have a choice of law in favor of the principles, or you could incorporate them in toto into your contract, we have now learned that there is two more ways of using the principles in practice. With one that you referred to, Larry, that you take some of the principles and you incorporate them as contract clauses into your individual contract, which apparently is rather easy for you. You just do it, and your partners do not seem to resist very much. And we have seen the second one, Christian, which indeed we observe with great pleasure that several arbitration panels are more or less referring to the PRICL, even though they are not applicable, neither as contract clauses nor as the governing law in the particular case, simply because the comments and illustrations provide a source of knowledge on reinsurance law and are like a point of reference. I would actually like to pose two questions. One is referring back to you, Larry. Just describe us how that works. I assume you cannot just put the conditions and terms there and they will be signed without a discussion. So is it hard to negotiate for incorporating parts of the PRICL as you do?
Yeah.
And I would like to connect this question with another question to Rosaria, because we were discussing this legal uncertainty that the governing law very often provides when it's a national law that doesn't provide reinsurance specific rules. Could you then probably also elaborate a little bit on what the contracting parties usually encounter on problems when they negotiate? And I assume it could be when negotiating the contract itself or when negotiating a claim settlement. It could be on both ends of the contract period. But maybe Larry, you.
Thank you. So back in 2020, we started with just one contract. It was not a small contract, so it was a meaningful large contract in itself, but a single contract just to test the market. It had about 10 counterparties, many of who also have been part of this project group. So it was kind of a test case to see how would the reinsurance markets receive a contract where PRICL is applied, even if just in a flexible manner with certain parts of the principles. And I was actually really surprised how smooth the entire process was. I think we received maybe 1 or 2 questions from parties who were not part of the PRICL working group. And after we explained to them that this is PRICL, I mean, this was in 2020, so it was fairly new, and probably it was not something that would have been broadcast in the public media as such. So once we explained what this was about, the process turned into something very simple. And part of that reason probably is because we could just say that if you're comfortable writing business under English law, then you should be comfortable writing business under PRICL, because the operation of the principles that we adopt here is fairly similar. And that was the end of it. And by now, we have PRICL applying to all the major contracts we have in the similar way. And the number of counterparties have gone from about 10 to something between 50 to 100 different reinsurance counterparties, which means basically the entire global reinsurance market. And this process has been equally smooth. So I have been very positively surprised by that.
Thank you for your question. Regarding the challenges we usually encounter during both the negotiation of the contracts and the claim settlement process, relate, in my opinion, to the fact that we have wording uniform, identically worded, but that are not interpreted uniformly. And therefore, the consequences arises when you are the claim settlement process in force, because some simply words like cause or event, well described within our project, could generate some misunderstanding or some disagreement between the parties about for example, the criteria to aggregate losses. Therefore, having this sound basis for consistent interpretation could really help in preventing legal discussions after the, not only before, but also after the conclusion of the wordings of the end of the contracts. Moreover, in my opinion, during the recent renewals, we saw a lot of new topics, like discussions about new exclusions, the pandemic exclusions, the war, the cyber topics. All these topics are quite new and obviously related to the new political economic scenarios. In case you have already granted some criteria how to interpret all the main part of your contract, you can be more focused on the new topics. And therefore, both not only the main reinsurance companies, but also all the other participants to the insurance market can have the possibility to have granted some principles and to be focused on the new exclusions or new discussions.
Yes, let me go back to these very practical issues, because as Christian said, choosing the PRICL implies trust in these new principles and to leave the known unknown for something else. So in your experience, and I think it's very precious to have you in the group, in your experience, what are the main differences that the parties, the practitioners could meet between applying and using the PRICL and the common business practice that you have the chance to experience in the London market, in the New York market during your activity?
So probably the main differences is just structurally, PRICL is codified law, follows a codified approach, while the large reinsurance markets like London or New York, they follow case law. And you all know case law is a mosaic of various cases, all fact-driven. And the range, how you can apply those cases is just very wide. And you can very easily misinterpret such a case and take out a snap from here and a piece of there and mix it together in a different form. And it all looks as it makes sense. It's not so easy with a codified law. It has a structure, it has a form, it has a relationship between the articles. So I think this is a mind shift, a shift in mindset. We have to move away from the old notion of, market practice is everything that matters, and the market will regulate itself, to a more disciplined, structured approach. So this is the first difference. It really is a civil law concept. It's codified, it's logical, it's abstract. It's not this case based on those facts and that case based on other facts, and you mix it together and you come to a rationale behind it. It's abstract, it follows a logical structure. That's the one difference, and that's a change in mindset, really, because the traditional reinsurance markets are common law markets. The second, there are a number of differences in there. One is the remedies that are proportional. So we move away from the all or nothing concept here in PRICL. And the other large difference probably is really the aggregation. There is a lot of disputes about aggregation, always have been. I've been in private practice too. I was happy aggregation is not such a clear thing. A lot of work in there. And there, PRICL really tries to take a new approach. The classic common law approach is, and I really reduce it now and simplify it. The classic common law approach is something happens, and that can lead to an insured case or not. It can lead to something. And if those insured cases are in a way connected more narrowly or more widely to that thing that happens, same place, same time, same circumstances, then it aggregates. In PRICL, again, we've taken a more systematic approach and said, we look at the first insured event, not at just something that happens. We look at the first materialization of a risk that has been insured under the direct contract. So the starting point is really much different, but in our opinion, at least, is also much clearer. Because you read those aggregation decisions, they cite the same law, although the result is 180-degree different. So something is wrong there. That it cannot be that based on the same cases you come to a totally different decision. And I think that would not be possible if you follow our rules. Our rules are clearer. The attachment points are very clear, and we followed a approach that is more a scientific, more a physics approach than an argumentative approach.
Thank you.
So I take it, Christian, that you said in the beginning, even if you invent the most perfect thing in the world, you still must be able to make people believe that it's the best thing in the world. It becomes, of course, a bit harder when you deviate from common practice, because what you do every day you find logical and normal, and you can't see a world without it. So it probably takes more effort to convince people that it's a good thing. On the other hand, as you mentioned, when the current system doesn't bring clarity into situations and you have case law that is totally contradictory in the outcome, then maybe the case law is actually the starting point to convince people. Do you agree with that?
It depends on the level of pain. If the level of pain is not high enough, if there are some cases which are just outrageous and others are, you know, within the acceptable, within the expected, the level of pain is not high enough. And then the lethargy of the industry plays with it. Why should I change something that, you know, maybe is not perfect, but it has worked for the last 100 years and we can live with it. That's it, you know, do you take the risk of being a decision maker to change something that works for something that you think is better, but maybe is maybe flaws? And this is what we need to overcome. And we also have to be aware of the realities. Contract negotiations are negotiations where there is power involved. And there's usually a more powerful and a less powerful party. And in a soft market, you know, though the buyer can push in clauses, and in a hard market, the insurer can push in clauses. And we've just moved from a soft to a hardening market. So actually now it would be time for the insurers to push it forward. Now they have the leverage. And before it was time of the insurance buyers to push this. Let's see. And this is why we need these groups like this. You couldn't have said it better. Those who accepted the PRICL were somehow involved in this working group. They had the trust. If you had to convince them, well, okay, maybe you have all the followers in the market and you have much more leverage than I do. But if you had to first convince all of them, I'm sure it would have been a much more cumbersome process. Now you had some allies already with the counterparties that made it easier.
Yeah. A small comment to this. This is the reason why we started small, why we chose to start with just the rules on disclosure and remedies. It's very simple, people understand it, and it allowed us to actually make PRICL known. And while we started with the markets who were most of them present in this working group, we ended up with the entire global reinsurance markets, more or less, done from China to the US and everything in between. So starting small, I think, was a good thing, because now a lot of the companies know PRICL exists, it is used, and you can use it. And let's see what is the next step. Now we have something that we like and our reinsurance partners like. It might sound one-sided to say, okay, proportional remedies and it benefits the direct insurers, but I don't believe the reinsurers love the old world either, because if you have to rely on avoidance, that's a declaration of war, and you lose a client for the next 10 years or however it takes for the directors to retire. So it was not ideal for any party. So I think it will be interesting. What next for this? Either we choose to adopt a bit more of the principles. I really like the overall general principles of PRICL. Those are typically not regulated in the existing contracts. So actually it allows you to do some things which typically the market doesn't do right now. There are some complex parts of it, like the aggregation part, which require more thought to adopt. But it will be interesting future, I think, for us.
Let me only to add another point, which relates to the fact that having the possibility to adopt only one part of the PRICL could result also in a benefit for the overall contract, because adopting a general principle like the utmost of good faith or the remedies shall result in an impact on exclusion clauses in other parts of the contract. Therefore, it is still important to have this possibility because the whole contract is finally worded in compliance with the reinsurance, the PRICL reinsurance.
Sure. Well, we get opinions from the auditorium. Jorge Anachel, can I please take the floor? And switch on the micro, please.
I would like to ask Larry, if you have had practical experience with awardings incorporated in PRICL. In other words, have they been subject to a court of law or arbitrators? And what was the result in that case? Thank you.
No, we have not had disputes involving these contracts so far, and I hope we don't end up in such a situation either.
But this is actually a question, Diana, and I wanted to ask Rosaria, whether you think that the PRICL as they stand now would be able to actually avoid legal disputes. That would be the perfect situation, not just make disputes clear once they are there, but avoid them because the situation is clear up front. Or would it require more detailed rules? Because so far, of course, we have drafted very general principles and gone into detail only in certain stages like aggregation, as has been mentioned.
As I said before, in my opinion, we selected obviously the right part of principle in order to have a sound basis for a uniform interpretation of the reinsurance contract. Finally, even if, as I told before, even if you select only one or two or three parts of this principle, you could have a good result in your contract. And moreover, probably you can see this not during the negotiation of the contract, which is easy in respect of these principles probably, but during the claims settlement process, where arise the problems usually.
Maybe I can add something to this. It's my personal belief and also hope that PRICL will really help a great deal to avoid disputes, but it will never make disputes not happening, because there will be some things that are unclear. Unless you write a book of law that is as long as the Bible, not even there you could cover all the situations, and that's not what we want. So if you have abstract rules, there will be interpretations that are not crystal clear. That's unavoidable. And secondly, again, if there's enough money at stake, there will be a dispute over who has to pay. And that's for PRICL now, just from the PRICL perspective, that's not that bad a thing to have some decisions, because circling back, it creates trust. If we have decisions where PRICL has been applied and they are rational and reasonable, this will help to build up trust in this concept.
Yes, in order to understand a little better this, so to say, effect for the future. So when you are negotiating a new contract, and so what would be the effect of applying PRICL principles for the future, or a sort of retrospective effect in case you already have some controversies, arbitration procedures, and so maybe PRICLs can be used to solve as a way of interpretation, as a way of restatement, even if, of course, we know that restatements are not always just restating the law, but also introducing new rules. So do you think the styles, the fact that we have comments, notes is helping in both ways, even when you have to choose this part or the other part? What is your impression? Because notes and comments are sometimes the necessarily link for practitioners to better understand.
In my opinion, the principles are both broad enough, but at the same moment clearly described. Within the comments, you can find all details that could prevent misunderstanding or legal disputes between the parties. And therefore, you have a comprehensive a description of the strict rule and also of the rationale behind this rule.
We have one more comment or question from the auditorium. Jürgen Basedow, former director of the Max Planck Institute on Foreign and Private International Law in Hamburg, please.
Christian mentioned that there have been several arbitration awards which made reference somehow to the. Now, arbitrators also have to know PRICL. From other areas of arbitration, I have the impression that the willingness to have recourse to such soft law, like the PIC, is much greater if the arbitrators are from different jurisdictions. If they are all from the same jurisdiction, they will say, oh, as we learned in the third year at law school or so, we do it this way or that way. It's our civil code which does it this way. Now, my question would be, do you have any knowledge about the composition of these arbitration panels, and how could that be a tool for the future to install the PRICL in the minds of arbitrators?
Well, Jürgen, you're spot on with your remark. I have to admit, I do not know what the panel was in those cases where there were references, but there is a point that I absolutely agree could be a huge leverage we could get for PRICL if we have, in particular, a panel with common law and civil law lawyers, or with lawyers from really different systems, where they cannot remember what their professor in third year said, where they have to find unifying concepts. I think there PRICL would lend itself as an idea structure to structure an award or a reasoning, and just by making it known, I think and this is this funny thing. I don't know how to create momentum really. If there is a certain momentum, arbitrators will start to copy from each other, and we need to get to that critical mass of references that professors are not much different, by the way. I think they also copy a lot from each other, but arbitrators as well. You know, if something has been said, it has some value just because it's been said, and then you interpret it and apply it. I can only say, use it, make references as often as you can, build that momentum. But I do not have the silver bullet how to really build that momentum.
But maybe we can add one thing to this question. Herman, did you? No, go ahead, please. So Herman Kusi, please. But could you push the button so that we can properly hear you? Thank you.
Chairman, I have been very much pleased to hear from practitioners how, in their opinion, the reception of our PRICL has had a benefitful effect in many ways. It's not so much a question, but a consideration. And it's about the relationship between the law of insurance contracts, of direct insurance, and, if you allow to express myself like that, the far-going absence of such law with respect to reinsurance contracts. Taking this as a starting point, would it be fair to say that, yes, of course, the introduction of the PRICL has a benefitful effect, because basically what we are doing in the PRICL, at least when we speak about such themes as remedies, as duty of disclosure, what we are doing is that not introducing in some way rules which have been developed with respect to direct insurance, to simple insurance contracts, which have been developed over the centuries under the influence of legislators, doctrinal writings, consumer influences, and so forth. Are we not doing something like transposing the benefits which have been reached with respect to direct insurance contract law now into reinsurance contracts, where, if I'm not mistaken, such a legal framework has been for a long time absent because of the nature of reinsurance, because of the international character of reinsurance with all the consequence thereof. So in a way, and it's a sort of daring proposition that I submit to you, what we are doing or what we try to do, and the question is whether reinsurance practitioners would agree with that, is having direct insurance law and legislation and case law being a sort of inspiration for what will happen in reinsurance contract law. So my thesis is finally here is a sort of example given by the development of direct insurance law, which can be in a very useful and benefitful way followed by, in some aspects, in some respects, by reinsurance practice. Is this blasphemy, or would you agree with that?
Happy to go first. I do not agree with that. Insurance law is very much consumer law, consumer interest driven. It's a different ballgame. It's still insurance, it's still risk transfer. There are still disclosure requirements, but all the rest, there is a reason why reinsurance law remained very lightly codified, while there is an increasing density of codification of direct insurance law. And I think that's really consumer driven. I think it's not that much that we can actually learn from the development of insurance law. I think it's more from where markets have moved, and maybe more from finance laws that we have to look when we talk about reinsurance. Finance laws is business to business to a large extent. It's large banks, it's investors, it's sophisticated parties. That development is maybe more a prediction to what could happen to reinsurance law than the consumer-driven direct insurance law.
But if you allow me, Chairman, when I hear you you talk about the introduction, the bilateralization, making the duty of care, the good faith principles bilateral. When I hear talk about the introduction of the principle of proportionality in the remedies, these are achievements of direct insurance law, basic insurance law, which now, if I have understood you correctly, are considered as being also beneficial in reinsurance relationships. These are achievements which have been, after a very long period, acquired in the field of direct insurance and in the legislation and the legal framework of direct insurance.
And other forms of law. So I think it's proportional remedies is not an invention of insurance law. We adopted it as a number of other fields of law have adopted it.
And probably the rules set up for reinsurance could result in consequences in the indirect insurance. Could happen the opposite.
I would maybe also offer an interesting perspective to this, what you mentioned. I mean, you're not wrong, of course, on this, but I think the fact is that reinsurance law is really old. A lot of the things there, as before PRICL, is based on something that happened ages ago. And we as societies have moved on from what was considered fair in 1800 to what is considered fair now in 2020. I mean, it used to be okay to discipline children physically. Now it's not okay at all, of course. So things with the world changes, and with PRICL, we have been able to move along with the world, like the direct insurance legislation has also done. And I will just finalize by mentioning something I learned. I had some guests over from London yesterday, and I learned there's an Instagram page that is dedicated to reinsurance. So maybe this is something we will need for the PRICL as well to make it known. Maybe, is it TikTok these days or Instagram? So
Really
you have to move on with the world.
But this, Larry, is a good keyword to answer a question that we received in the blog, whether those arbitration awards would be published and publicly available. And in principle, the answer is no. We got some reports that they were used. We cannot read the texts and not see in what way exactly they refer. But there is at least one arbitration award from Norway where the lawyers obviously had allowance from their clients to report on the results. And they have quite explicitly and in a detailed manner reported on how the PRICL have been used in one of these COVID-19 related aggregation cases. And I think anyone could Google that and find it immediately and get a quite good impression on in what way PRICL are being used as a source of knowledge in cases where they do not apply. They have not been chosen partly or in total in those cases. Now, we're slowly but steadily coming to an end of this, but Stefan Klein is another question, please.
Just one short remark in respect of dissemination and arbitration panels, because I just had the opportunity talking last week to a colleague who was a senior executive in reinsurance, and quite often you see them participating as an arbitrator or even as an umpire. So from my perspective, I mean, these community and these arbitration panels are a very, very appropriate representative for us for dissemination of those principles. I was asking him actually, did you know the principles? He said no, and I was sending him simply the link from the Goethe University. So again, I think this is a very good area where we could disseminate the principles.
And wouldn't that also require that the movement that we are somehow observing will go on? The movement I'm talking about is the juridification of the reinsurance relationships, because we were told in the old day that it was really business-based and the claim settlement was done in a business manner, more looking at the business side rather than the legal side, and that may change. And also the type of arbitrator may change more recently. Do you observe this in the market, that it's more lawyers that will be called to arbitrate?
From my days in claims, I always said the law comes first, then comes business. So business judgment and business negotiation will only start once the positions have been clarified, and that's done under applicable law. So I think the better and the easier the application of the applicable law to the facts is, the sooner the business elements will come into play. And in the end, in insurance and reinsurance, it will be much more business driven, of course, than direct insurance. You have an ongoing relationship that has sometimes been ongoing under the same contracts I don't know, I know from Japan, some contracts were running for 30 years. If you fall apart with every disagreement, that's really not good for business. Yet, before you really discuss business, you have to analyze the case and apply the law. So I think one is not contradictory to the other. A strong codification of reinsurance law would not make business decisions unnecessary, and the other way around. The business decision cannot be taken on shaky grounds.
Maybe I would just add to this that, as I see it at least, and I hope many of who have actually studied PRICL more also agree, is that PRICL as a concept and as a set of rules is actually rather fair to both parties. So even if you don't adopt PRICL to your contracts, if you need something as a baseline for a solution to a dispute, you have a problem you need to negotiate, PRICL can be extremely useful source material in that solution. And I've actually seen that from the sidelines happen, that you have a problem with your partner and you start with something and you discuss, and then you decide, hey, actually, could this solution for this problem work out for us? Even if we haven't used PRICL in the past, but it gives a fair baseline set of rules that you can also adopt in a friendly manner, even if you have a contentious issue. So.
Yeah, fully agree. That's a really valid aspect. As those arbitration panels have done, they're more used to materials to the PRICL. But if you want to test, what is a fair solution? Let's agree to disagree on the law, but let's find a fair solution. PRICL might provide good answers, indeed.
And also good explanation about how to solve some very practical issues. Is not something which remains a theoretical principle, but is a concrete way to solve a concrete problem that we encounter during a negotiation or claim settlement.
There's a toolbox to be used also for contracts that have already been negotiated and present problems, of course.
Well, if there's no more comments or answers, I think we've reached more than the end of this event. I would like to thank once more our panelists. I think you gave us very, very interesting and also very surprising to a certain extent answers, very positively surprising answers as to the use of PRICL already in the market. I would like to thank all participants here in this room. And of course, all those who have observed the event remotely at home or in their offices. Thank you for being with us. My final thanks goes, of course, to UNIDROIT for hosting us. It's General Secretary Ignacio Tirado and the Vice General Secretary Anna Veneziano. And Anna, I somehow expect that you have good news for those who are in this room. Would you want to spread them, please?
Thank you very much. And allow me also to thank the panelists. That was really incredibly interesting, exciting. And this is something that for us at least, but I think also for the audience and the public was slightly unexpected maybe, but at the same time, really very nice to see how soft law can help the practice of contract law. So it's good news, generally speaking, and for reinsurance contracts in particular. So, but I have better news still, because there is a cocktail waiting for those of you, unfortunately not for those who attend online, but for those of you who have braved the cold of this room. And so it's on the first floor. There are indications, arrows for those of you who don't know the building. And so you are kindly invited to go to the first floor. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you.